You've been taught a narrow slice of the past, names, dates, a sequence of familiar headlines. But history has other rooms, the kind that stay closed because what happened inside them was not loud, but careful. Power did not always arrive with spectacle. More often it moved on paper, in ledgers and decrees, in rituals repeated until they felt normal. That is where our story begins, not with shock, but with systems. Systems that measured people, sorted them, and redirected their lives with the calm certainty of an office stamp. Imagine a world where a knock at the door is not a crisis, just a procedure, an official voice, the same phrases spoken in 100 towns, the same instructions delivered as if they were weather. What followed was predictable. Selection, separation, and long education under a new rule book. The aim was practical, shape reliable servants of the state from the youngest minds, and it improved itself over time. Records speak of height and age, temperament and aptitude, language drills, and years of supervised training. The method was not improvisation, it was policy. Those who rose highest often began with least control over their own beginnings. Their lives read like paradoxes. Born in one faith, advanced in another, raised in one village, later building the road that led back to it. Monuments, schools and bridges appeared as symbols of success, yet each addition also tightened the net. Infrastructure is never neutral. A road can carry grain or regiments. An archive can preserve memory or authorize its revision. The same ink that signs a generous grant can fund a campaign that silences dissent. In this landscape, improvement and obedience walked side by side. Communities calculated the cost in ordinary details. A field without the next generation rests too long. A craft without apprentices turns into a display behind glass. A song fades when the last fluent singer moves away. Archaeology sometimes captures the moment when routine simply stopped. Tools left in furrows, doors unbarred at midday, a prayer set down mid-sentence. This is how systemic pressure looks close up. Not a single disaster, but the slow unwinding of daily life. The deeper we look, the clearer it becomes that control was not only about armies or weapons. It lived in subtler choices. What language a child learned first, what stories they were allowed to hear, which traditions were remembered and which were quietly erased. Languages can disappear not only through violence, but through disuse, when parents teach their children the words of the powerful because those words offer bread, protection, or a future. Over generations, an entire heritage can vanish, not in flames, but in silence. Religious life faced the same pressures. Temples, churches, and schools were not only houses of worship or study, but also anchors of cultural identity. To repurpose or dismantle them was to signal that the old ways no longer had a place in the public square. The transformation was symbolic as much as it was practical. What had once been a gathering point became a reminder of who now held authority. Even when buildings remained standing, their meaning shifted, reshaped by the new power that claimed them. Economic systems, too, reinforced the message. Records from villages show how entire communities could be reduced by numbers alone. A family might work all year and yet see most of its harvest taken as tax, leaving barely enough for survival. The arithmetic was relentless, stripping not just wealth, but dignity. Some tried to resist by hiding grain or moving to remote areas, but the pressure was constant. Many eventually changed identity, not out of conviction, but necessity, trading belief for survival. In this way, economics became a tool of transformation more effective than open conflict. Generationally, the effect was profound. A son who watched his father humiliated in public ceremonies might decide that adaptation was safer than pride. A daughter who saw neighbors disappear might learn that blending in was the only protection. These were not dramatic choices, but everyday calculations, shaping communities one family at a time. What was once heritage became memory, and what was memory eventually became myth. Occasionally, individuals rose within the very structures that had uprooted them. Their stories are the most complex. Taken young, trained in new disciplines, they achieved remarkable influence, leading armies, commissioning monuments, shaping policy. To their communities of origin, they were a reminder of loss. To the empire, they were proof of the system's success. Their legacies often carried both pride and sorrow. A bridge that connected cities, but also made invasions easier, a law that brought order, but also ensured compliance. Every achievement carried shadows. When historians look back, they see not just isolated tragedies, but a pattern repeated across centuries. Entire regions gradually emptied, not because of a single catastrophe, but because of consistent pressure. Demographic records reveal villages where the young vanished, where birth rates plummeted, where communities faded from maps. To study these patterns is to realize that extinction does not always announce itself with explosions or fire. Sometimes it looks like slow arithmetic, fewer children, fewer workers, fewer voices, until silence replaces culture. And so, piece by piece, an entire world was reshaped. Not by sudden conquest, but by steady design, not by forgetting, but by enforced remembrance of only what was permitted. This is the story we continue to follow, one that unsettles precisely because it unfolded in daylight, hidden in plain sight. Where commands ended, mathematics continued the work. Families learned the lesson without instruction, when most of your harvest belongs to someone else, and there are fees for roads, markets, wells, and even repairs. Survival becomes an equation with only one answer. Public ceremonies turned payments into theater. Private conversations turned choices into strategy. What to plant, what to sell, what to teach a child to call themselves so that tomorrow is slightly kinder than today. In such a world, belief was not only an inner conviction, it was also a calculation about safety, inheritance, and hope. This is not a tale of graphic horrors. It is a study of design, policies carried out by clerks, ceremonies repeated until they felt like custom, maps redrawn so that certain communities appeared smaller, quieter, easier to manage. We will move carefully through this terrain, naming patterns, tracing incentives, and listening for voices that almost disappeared. If this kind of history feels unsettling, that is because it touches the ordinary. Schools, roads, taxes, titles, stamps. Stay with me. The archive is open, and the story is larger than you were told. As the centuries turned, the system revealed its greatest strength: longevity. Unlike sudden wars that burn bright and fade, this form of control lasted because it was patient. Every generation inherited not only land or work, but also the calculations their parents had already made. If one family resisted and paid the price, neighbors remembered and adjusted their choices. Over time, resistance seemed less like bravery and more like self-destruction. Compliance, even reluctant, became the path of survival. This quiet endurance reshaped entire societies. Languages once vibrant became whispers at home, then faded altogether. Cultural practices once central to identity survived only in fragments, songs with forgotten meanings, rituals stripped of context. When archaeologists dig centuries later, they often find evidence of abrupt decline. Tools left unused, shrines abandoned, documents incomplete. But for those who lived it, the process felt gradual, like sand slipping between fingers until there was nothing left to hold. Numbers recorded by officials often tell the harshest truths. Tax ledgers, property records, and census counts reveal the invisible weight pressing down on daily life. For example, when harvest yields were divided, only a fraction remained for the farmers themselves. The rest flowed upward, funding armies, palaces, and the machinery of empire. On paper it looked efficient, columns of figures neatly balanced. But behind those numbers lay hunger, migration, and despair. A family that could not meet its obligations was not simply poor, it was broken, its members dispersed or absorbed elsewhere. At times, individuals chosen by the system rose to extraordinary prominence. They became generals, scholars, or administrators celebrated for their talents. Yet behind every such figure was a story of transformation so complete that their original families, villages, or traditions no longer recognized them. They were proof of the empire's ability to reshape people, turning outsiders into insiders, but only at the cost of erasing their beginnings. Their achievements carried prestige, but also served as living reminders of what had been lost. The emotional toll is harder to measure, but no less real. Diaries, poems, and oral traditions describe the sorrow of separation, the silence of parents who never recovered from losing children, the whispered memories of communities that no longer existed in full. These voices are faint compared to the vast machinery of official records, yet they reveal the human side of the story. What is the cost of watching your neighbor's house empty? Of realizing that each year fewer familiar faces gather at the market? What is the weight of knowing that your traditions may end with you? By the time scholars look back, the scale appears immense. Whole populations diminished, cultures erased, and yet the system persisted largely unchallenged. Why? Because it was designed to look ordinary. Taxes, education, ceremonies, and public rituals all appeared legitimate, even necessary. Only when the pieces are assembled together do we see the deeper pattern, a machine that consumed identity while presenting itself as order. That is why this history remains so unsettling. It was not hidden behind secrecy. It unfolded in plain sight, with documents and rituals that seemed mundane, even as they slowly dismantled civilizations. By now, you can see that what makes this story so haunting is not the spectacle of violence, but the efficiency of systems designed to last. When a community pays most of its harvest year after year, when schools teach only approved languages, when worship is confined or repurposed, the result is not a sudden collapse, but a gradual fading. Generations grow up knowing no alternative, and what begins as pressure becomes normality. The most powerful empires understood that permanence comes not from fear alone, but from reshaping memory itself. This reshaping often appeared in the smallest details. A coin stamped with new symbols replaced older ones. A law required contracts in a different tongue. A ceremony once held in private now had to be performed in public, reinforcing who held power. None of these acts looked extraordinary on their own, but together they formed a tapestry of control that wrapped itself around entire civilizations. To unravel it would require not just defiance, but collective will, something rare when survival was already fragile. In many cases, survival demanded compromise. Parents made choices they never would have considered under other circumstances. Teaching children the language of authority rather than their ancestral tongue ensured safety, but eroded heritage. Agreeing to rules of taxation kept the family farm, but guaranteed poverty. Attending the required ceremonies preserved life, but chipped away at dignity. These choices were rational in the moment, yet over generations they added up to cultural disappearance. Extinction rarely announces itself with a single blow. More often it seeps in through countless small concessions. The archives preserve glimpses of how communities responded. Some kept hidden traditions alive, practicing rituals in secret or whispering stories at night. Others wrote their struggles into letters or chronicles, though many of these accounts were later destroyed or suppressed. Still, fragments remain, lines of poetry, inscriptions carved in stone, marginal notes in manuscripts. They are voices reaching across time, reminding us that even under immense pressure, people resisted in ways both quiet and profound. What stands out is the precision of the design. These were not chaotic acts of domination, they were calculated programs meant to transform entire populations. Bureaucrats recorded numbers with care. Officials enforced rules with consistency, and leaders justified the system with elaborate reasoning. To them, it was governance. To those who lived beneath it, it was survival, measured in smaller harvests, fewer children, fading customs, and diminishing hope. The true cruelty lay not in sudden violence, but in the predictability of loss. And yet, despite all efforts to erase them, traces of the old worlds survive. Archaeological layers reveal abandoned towns. Genetic studies show population shifts. Languages once thought dead still echo faintly in religious liturgies. Memory has a way of leaving footprints even when the system tried to sweep them away. To listen closely to those fragments is to realize how deliberate the silence around this history has been. It was not forgotten by accident, it was hidden by design. When we reach the end of this long arc, one truth becomes clear. History is not only what survives in books, monuments, or classrooms. It is also what is deliberately excluded. The system endured for centuries, not because it was invisible, but because it became ordinary. Each generation inherited a world already reshaped and rarely paused to ask how it had been altered. In this way, the past was rewritten in real time, leaving future generations with gaps so wide they seemed natural. Consider how memory itself can be engineered. Communities stripped of their language cannot tell their own story. Families fragmented by policies cannot pass down heritage. Even when buildings stand and records remain, the meaning attached to them can be changed until the original significance fades beyond recognition. Over centuries, the result is not simply a lost tradition, but the impression that such a tradition never existed at all. That is the deepest kind of erasure, not just destroying a culture, but removing the knowledge that it ever lived. For modern readers, the most shocking part is not the cruelty of individual acts, but the durability of the design. Empires rose and fell, yet the machinery of control outlasted them, inherited and adapted by new rulers. What began as temporary measures became permanent policies. What started as exceptions turned into norms. It is this continuity that magnifies the scale of loss. 14 centuries of structured suppression left behind not only ruins, but silences, whole civilizations absent from memory. And yet, silence is never complete. A melody remembered by descendants, a manuscript hidden in a wall, a word preserved in liturgy. These fragments reveal that resistance took many forms. Even when communities could not stop the machinery, they tried to preserve meaning in secret corners of life. Each fragment is a testimony that survival is not only physical, but also cultural. These echoes may seem small, but they remind us that history is not as thoroughly erased as the architects of control intended. What makes this history dangerous even today is not only its scale, but its implications. If such a system could operate openly for over a millennium, documented in archives, justified in laws, visible in daily rituals, what else might still be hidden in plain sight? Which stories remain untold because they are inconvenient, uncomfortable, or politically risky? The past teaches us that erasure is often intentional, and that forgetting can be engineered as effectively as remembering. For us, living centuries later, the challenge is simple but urgent. We must recognize that what we were taught is only a fragment. To see the full picture requires listening for the voices almost silenced, reading between the lines of official records, and acknowledging the systems that thrived by hiding in normality. The truth is rarely lost completely. It is buried beneath layers of silence. Unearthing it requires patience, courage, and the willingness to confront stories that may disturb but also enlighten. And so we close this journey not with final answers, but with an invitation to question, to seek, to resist the comfort of half-truths, because knowing what was hidden changes how we see the present. And once you see, you cannot unsee.